So I want to talk about wins and losses and grading sales by a criteria of wins and losses. I think that this is a fairly flawed metaphor to use in evaluating if client services sales is successful or unsuccessful. It always drove me nuts in CRMs like Pipedrive that I'd have to categorize something as a loss if it didn't turn from a lead into a signed contract when I decided not to move forward. I decided I didn't want to participate in somebody's insane RFP. I decided that the client was a jerk and I didn't want to proceed. Why is that a loss? That's not a loss. That is me deciding I don't want to proceed. I think a healthier way to look at this than wins and losses is to look at all of these conversations, introductions, interactions as opportunities. Some of these opportunities mature and become projects, they become relationships, they become retainers, they develop and grow into really valuable relationships over time. Some of these opportunities end after an initial phone call that stinks and you don't like the client and it moves no further. So instead of it being a win-loss kind of evaluation that puts way too much ownership on the client side of this equation and not enough on the agency, studio, consultant side of this. Let's look at these as opportunities, some of which evolve and grow to a point, they advance to a point where they become signed engagements, some don't advance. Once we start to look at then the details of why didn't that advance? Well, these didn't advance because we made the decision for them not to advance. These other ones, despite our best efforts, despite the fact that we wanted to work with them, we would have loved this client, we would have done great work, it didn't advance. It didn't turn into a paid engagement. Why? That's a really interesting question to ask. In the instances where we, gave a damn about this and really wanted it to move forward and it didn't move forward, then that's the data that you need to scrutinize in the sales process. If you look at everything just as wins and losses, though, there's this metaphor of statistical analysis that I think applies, where statistics are like bathing suits. What they reveal is illuminating and what they hide is crucial. And that's the case here. If everything gets swept under the rug of wins and losses, then there's an amazing amount of nuanced insight into how your sales process behaves that gets lost in that kind of reductive math. You really need to scrutinize these things in a more holistic way. And truly, the other benefit, I think, of looking at these things as opportunities and not wins and losses is it begins a process where it breaks down the barrier between what is considered sales and what is considered the project in a lot of cases. In my mind, when this is all working really well, there's no difference. There's simply no difference. The relationship you have early on should be the relationship you have as you're delivering things later. It should be one continuum, one timeline that an opportunity progresses along. If it's all a part of the same timeline, if it's all one consistent engagement, one consistent conversation, then there's a much higher likelihood of the client experiencing on day one of the conversation the same kind of collaboration they're going to experience on day 100 of the collaboration. If the overall dialogue is looked at as one continuum, there's a better chance that there's less of a perceived bait and switch where there's all of this yes agreeability, kowtowing to what the client wants in the initial dialogue, and then cranky resistance later when the project starts because it gets thrown over to a vastly different team. If this is all the same, if it's all the same relationship with the same kind of, culture and brand and experience, then it's a much more holistic way to manage these complex relationships. It gives clients a better chance to make an informed evaluation in the early days of the conversation and say, if this is the kind of collaboration we're going to have on day 100 of a project, this is not for us. Or if this is the kind of collaboration we're going to have on day 100 of a project, this is exactly what we need. Let's embrace being consistent all the way through and look at all of this as just, nothing really changes. It just is, you may be talking to somebody slightly different as you get into the weeds of the project. It may be now that, money's changing hands once the project starts. But if we can start to look at this as all a part of the same conversation, one opportunity that extends as far as both the agency and the client decide, then there's a much better chance of this being, kind of a more holistic experience. And it's also a better way to ultimately evaluate the efficacy of this process and not reduce all of this down to some kind of, you know, BS sports analogy that people embrace because they're, you know, so tough and have so much kind of, hardened calluses in the sales process, and it's just wins and losses. It's, you know, let's divorce ourselves from that kind of BS and have a much more nuanced and thoughtful approach to this. And I think if we do, then we're setting ourselves up to be better partners throughout the project, both the client and the agency. And we'll get to a point where we can have much more interesting conversations about how all of this behaves. So that's my soapbox rant for